Protect College Sports Act. That's what the bill is labeled, the one that's supposed to put up guardrails to get college sports going in a more positive direction, to kind of get some guidelines, I guess, for how things are to operate going forward, to make it a level playing field, yada, yada, yada. Seems like we've heard all this before, but I think this one might be a little different. I think this one might actually have an opportunity to get passed through Congress and maybe become a thing and do what it is intended to do. I don't know. I'm no expert, but I am going to ask an expert. He's the publisher of Extra Points. His name is Matt Brown. He's joining us now on the AAA Heating and Air phone line. Matt, welcome aboard. Appreciate you coming on. But before we get into the minutia of this 111-page document, please repeat to me what you just said before you came on about your love of these kinds of news stories.
You bet. Extra Points is a publication that only covers off the field stories in the college sports industry. For the last 6 years, every day I write about stuff like higher education finance, changes in NIL policy, what's happening in Capitol Hill, what's happening with multimedia rights, how are people getting revenue and spending revenue. And I have a lot of empathy for fans that think, brother, I watch college football, so I don't have to think about that stuff. And I understand. But every once in a while, you need to know it. And when that happens, I'm here. And so I'm more than happy to chat about this today.
Well, and I don't mean to get off topic, though, but you've really touched on something. I tell people all the time that, yeah, I got into it because I love sports. I love college sports. I love college football. Yeah. But more and more, I find myself caring about other things. I want to know a coach's buyout rather than his record against conference opponents. I want to know maybe what a guy's NIL value is rather than how many rushing touchdowns he has scored this season. That's where we are in this day and age. And I'll circle around to the bigger point, Matt.
Yeah.
Do you think that this bill, the Protect College Sports Act, a bipartisan bill, so that in and of itself gives me hope.
Yeah.
Do you think this has a chance of getting through?
I do think it has a chance of getting through. I would say a chance. The politics behind this are complicated, and they're complicated in some ways for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with the bill itself or college sports. One of the bigger challenges is the timing, right? I'm chatting with you here on May 28th, and Congress is going to go into recess in August, and then we have a midterm election in November. And the couple of months before that, nobody's really doing any legislative work because they're going to be on the road campaigning. So there's a very narrow window to get this through committees, to get this up to a vote, to make changes to the bill, and then also take it back to the House, where similar legislation has not been able to advance. So these things can happen. It would be much easier if this bill was being introduced, say, 4 months ago. There would be more time to make changes and do the horse trading. But there, honest to God, is a bipartisan coalition of both conservative Republicans and more progressive Democrats and people in between that look at a lot of the issues happening in college sports right now with some real frustration about eligibility, about the various NIL state laws that differ from place to place, about the news of just constant lawsuits. I know it's frustrating to fans. God knows it's frustrating to coaches and athletic directors because they keep complaining to people like us about it. And it's frustrating to lawmakers too. And so if the timing is right, there is a narrow path for this to happen. But it's by no means a sure thing.
I look at this and I see a lot of common sense rules or regulations, or however you want to frame it, instituted into it. A 1-year transfer for undergrads. I see everyone wrapping their arms around that. 5 years of eligibility. The Lane Kiffin rule, can't hire another school's coach during the season. But here's one that really stood out to me, and I don't think we're hearing enough about it, Matt. It's not really against athletes being employees, and I really think that's what separates it from previous attempts, most notably the SCORE Act. What's your take?
Yeah, I unquestionably think that's one of the biggest differences here. And that's been one of the challenges in trying to get any kind of bipartisan legislative effort across the finish line at all. Most congressional Democrats, to the extent that they care about this, some of them don't, but to the extent that congressional Democrats typically do, they are very much against any rule or law that says athletes uniformly cannot be made employees. Many Republicans, particularly in the Southeast, although maybe this is starting to change a little bit on the university side, but generally speaking, are very much opposed to that, especially because of what that might mean for organized labor. right? Not trying to be partisan, but like I'm not. You look at a map and understand community feelings about unions tend to be different in South Carolina or Mississippi or Florida than they are in Michigan, Illinois, Massachusetts, and that kind of manifests itself in this conversation. This bill has attempted to be written in a way that is neutral and says nothing in this bill should be used to argue for or against employment. What I think will be interesting, though, and part of the conversation that has to happen as this bill is being discussed and circulated throughout the Senate is what happens if a judge in the next 18 months rules that some athletes should be classified as employees. And there are federal cases working their way through that system right now. What happens if the new case is brought forward? Because with the House settlement, if you're paying a left tackle $3 million, the anti-employment arguments look dumber and dumber than maybe they did 15 years ago, right? How does the structure of this bill change if we move into this world? What Cruz and Cantwell's people would tell you is this can be flexible depending on what happens with the legal system at a future date. We'll see if their colleagues believe them.
I find it interesting, though, that you mentioned neutral, but I look at this bill and I look at some language in the bill and, well, okay, allow pooling of media rights if 75% of the FBS agree. Well, you remove the SEC in the Big Ten and you get exactly still 75.9%. So that would get passed if the SEC and Big Ten choose not to pool the media rights. And then you also go to Section 205, freeze mergers for leagues with $1 billion or more in 2025 revenue. That's only the SEC and Big Ten. So it seems to me that, a lot of this is neutral, but it's also maybe to stymie the SEC and Big Ten from breaking away, doing their own thing, or having as much power as they seem to be continuing to collect.
Sure. And let me try to be clear about this. The bill tries to be neutral about employment. It is extremely not neutral about the Big Ten or the SEC, right? Like I probably can't use the exact language I'd like on a FCC regulated channel here, but this is a stick it to the SEC and Big Ten kind of bill. And part of that is Maria Cantwell, the Democratic senator from Washington, was acutely aware of what the dissolution of the Pac-12 meant for Pullman as a community, what it meant for the local economy in the eastern part of that state, and is acutely aware of constituents from UW who hate having to go play Rutgers on a Thursday night for a baseball game. Like the Washington is an epicenter for maybe some of the losers in realignment. For Ted Cruz in Texas, it's not exactly a state secret that Cody Campbell, a billionaire, regent and booster of Texas Tech, is also acutely aware and sensitive to those kind of concerns. If there's a breakaway of just those two leagues, that disadvantages Texas Tech. That disadvantages the Big 12, which has a lot of Texas institutions specifically. One of the things that I honestly think the Big 10 and the SEC leadership and their lobbyists did not really appreciate is those two leagues have been very out in front over the last couple of years and have thrown their weight around about who's in charge, whether that's the college football playoff, whether that's the NCAA tournament, whether that's internal governance. And you can do that because you have the power. But if you alienate enough people, those folks can go to their lawmakers, and there are more senators representing states outside the Big Ten than there are people within that footprint. And that's a risk that these two leagues here have run. We can argue about whether this is principled limited government, whether this is a legislative overreach, whether this is good policy. I could be persuaded into any of those things. I do think it's a little bit funny. After everything that's happened with the Big Ten and the SEC the couple of years, like, of course there's people are going to be angry about it.
We're joined by Matt Brown, publisher of Extra Points. You can follow him on X at Matt Brown EP. Matt, just a couple more minutes, please. I have to think that the big winners in all this, obviously, other than perhaps the college sports fan who is now going to have less to whine about going forward, would be the ACC, the Big 12. Presumably, this will help them level the playing field to some degree. But I'm wondering, where does Notre Dame fit into this? Do they look at this from the same vantage point as an ACC or Big 12, or do they see something entirely different?
It's a great question, because Notre Dame's conference affiliation, and this is something that I think sometimes fans get a little bit confused about, is legitimately not just about money. If the only thing that was important to Notre Dame was how do I maximize our broadcast revenue, they would join the Big Ten tomorrow. They would make more money in that league, or potentially the SEC than they would as an independent, potentially even more in the ACC than they would as an independent. Being an independent is like structurally important to Notre Dame's institutional identity. It's like part of the foundational myth of the school, right? We arose out of anti-Catholic sentiment and anti-immigration sentiment about Central and Southern Europeans. And so we had to go our own way and build our own system because the Big Ten and the powers that be shunned us. And now we're this great research university. Like, it would be walking back away from that to then join this power structure. One of the other winners I think that is important to mention here, beyond any specific conference, if this bill happens and everything is signed the way that it's written, would be, I think, every school, because it would dramatically lower labor costs. Right now, like, we have the House settlement. The cap's supposed to be $20.5 million, and you and I and God and everybody else knows nobody is sticking to that number in the P4. I think a conservative estimate would be that the majority, if not all, of the P4 schools are spending double that across their entire athletic department: football, men's basketball, baseball, the whole works, right? If you have a cap that has federal enforcement mechanisms and you get an antitrust exemption so people can't sue over it, what people are spending on athletes is going to drop significantly, which is great news if you're an AD or a coach or a budget-conscious school. It may be good news if you're a college athlete at like North Texas or at Coastal or Winthrop or something. It's really bad news if you're a top 1,000 football or men's basketball player, because the days of getting $4 million, $5 million to play quarterback will not happen in this system.
Yeah, and also the ability to enforce those laws. To your point, the NCAA, I would presume, then have subpoena power. And that just changes everything. And that would actually make this is actually NCAA friendly, because in my view, Matt, and you know better than I do, I have to think that this maybe ensures the NCAA's relevance at least a bit longer, because now it does have some juice.
Yeah, I mean, this has almost everything that the NCAA had been asking for the last several years. The NCAA says, hey, we can't have 38 different state laws for NIL. We need national, federal to preempt all of those rules. That's in this bill. NCAA says, we can't handle these escalating labor costs, and we don't have the legal authority to enforce those ourselves, because that's breaking antitrust law right now. We need a limited exemption for that. That's in this bill. It's maybe not as broad as the NCAA would have originally liked, but it's there. The only provisions that are not there are a ban on athlete employment and a couple of these latter pages, which are, screw the Big Ten and the SEC, which, those leagues aren't going to be crazy about. But if you're Jim Phillips, you probably are smiling a little bit right now and don't care that much. The loudest voices that you're seeing against this as of today are from athlete rights organizations, from agents or lawyers, because the single biggest loser in this bill right now would be anybody that represents an elite athlete's financial interests.
Fascinating stuff from Matt Brown of Extra Points. Matt, before I let you go, what are you working on? Tell people what they can get if they subscribe to your fantastic newsletter.
You bet. A lot of what I do is writing about money and data and finance in college sports. So as an example, earlier this week, we filed over 200 open records requests. We got the operational budget, football budget for everybody that's public in FBS and FCS. So that's not player payroll, but if you want to know what people are spending on travel and food and administrative salaries and all of the coaching staff from Ohio State to Mississippi Valley State, we've got that on Extra Points. We have that for most NCAA sports. I'm going to be writing about the Wisconsin job opening at the athletic director level for tomorrow. We have some other political news coming and updates to our games. We have a game where you can be an athletic director and navigate what that world is like, which you can play at extrapointsmb.com.
Yeah, I'll let you know how that works out for me. I upped my subscription, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful. I appreciate the support.
Appreciate you coming on, Matt. He's Matt Brown. Follow him on X at Matt Brown EP. It's Connecting Carolina, presented by FanStream Sports. You're the man, Matt.